Hello and welcome back to Freedom from Fire. I will be your host, Lieutenant Lisa Desamour. I'm currently stationed in our department's Fire Prevention Division, where community risk reduction efforts are our primary goal. Here at Freedom from Fire, we aim to improve your quality of living by giving you fire and life safety information. We also introduce you to our local safety partners. During these very taxing and difficult times, we are faced with uncertainty and an overwhelming mix of emotions and feelings. The dynamic and norms of society today is very different. Mental health is a global concern, thus, a global response is necessary to begin addressing mental health concerns and the stigma that is often associated with it. Mental health concerns are different for each person affected. No challenge or diagnosis is exactly the same, and some mental health concerns may be difficult to recognize. There are many generalizations and assumptions, but realities vary, and these challenges can pose a significant impact. Today, we will attempt to shed some light and talk about various aspects of mental health that include our emotional, psychological, and social well being. Some stats to better understand what mental health and substance use challenges looked like back in 2020. As of late June, 40% of US adults reported struggling with mental health or some form of substance abuse. One in six US youth aged 6 to 17 experienced a mental health disorder. The average delay between onset of mental health symptoms and treatment is an astounding 11 years. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 10 to 34 in the US and the 10th leading cause of death. Transgender adults are nearly 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general population. The most common mental health concern in the US, anxiety disorders, which affect 40 million adults, thus turning into 18.1% of the population. Today, to discuss as much as we can discuss in this short amount of time, is Mr. Phillip Roundtree. Thank you so much, Phillip, for joining us today. Now I introduce you, Mr. Phillip Roundtree. Should it be Dr. Roundtree, or was that okay what I
Yeah,
did?
a couple years. I'm in my second semester in a doctorate of social work program, so 2 more years, and then you could call me the Black Dr. Phil.
Oh, I like that. Okay. All right. So I have a lot of questions, Phillip, and I think I kind of let you know beforehand. It's okay if we don't get through all the questions because I don't want you to feel rushed. As much content that you want to discuss for each question, please feel free to do so. On the flip side of that, if you see or feel like I'm cutting you off, it's again because I got to kind of be mindful of our time. But I really want to at least try to tackle at least half of it. And if not, I'll pray that you come back on for a second part. We'll do a two series, maybe three series. Who knows what the future holds?
Sounds
But
good.
first, for how I open with all my guests is to please tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I am Phillip Roundtree. I am a master's level social worker. I also have a master's of exercise science. As I said, I'm in school getting my doctorate in social work. So what that means is I'm in a lot of debt. I owe a lot of people. Not sure if they're getting their money, but I owe them. Right.
Okay.
I have a I've worked in every area of social work, child welfare here in Philadelphia, behavioral health, which I still currently do as a therapist. I'm also a professor at Delaware State University in the social work department, a full time entrepreneur at this point. I have my business, it's called Quadify LLC. And so Quad represents the four areas of wellness that I deem are essential in order to not only live but to thrive in life, and that's physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional wellness. And so if there's a deficit in one, there's more than likely to be a deficit in another, right? So we're talking about this integrated approach to wellness, and services that I do offer include therapy, public speaking, and just a slew of other things.
Okay. So you're a very busy man, or is that an understatement? Because clearly, you got a lot going on.
Caffeine helps.
Does it? Okay. All right. Well, that just kind of gives us a little tidbit into your background, so I appreciate that. Um, then the most pressing question to begin with would be, what is the importance of mental health and mental health awareness?
Word. So, I think you touched on it when we talk about what exactly mental health is. It's speaking to the cognitive, behavioral, and emotional well-being, which Quantify is a big proponent of. And to, break it down to layman's terms, it's really about how people think, feel, and behave, and how those all intersect. And so, when we talk about our mental health, it can impact our quality of life, our day to day. Like we deserve, just by being here, we deserve to live a fruitful and productive life. And so if we're impacted by depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and a host of other formal diagnoses, then we may not necessarily be living the life that we deserve. And so when we add that awareness part to it, that it's important, because we know that mental health is stigmatized here in America, everywhere, frankly, but especially here in America. I'm somebody who's open about living with depression and anxiety. I actually got to leave once we're done this and go refill my medication that I take, because I was, suicidal for 15 years, not really understanding why. And that's despite me being in this profession, right? Because again, it's easy to tell people. We know this in our day to day. It's easy to tell other people what to do than take our own
Mhm.
advice. And so, what I came to understand about it wasn't necessarily that I was suicidal, but it was the anxiety and how it manifests itself. And so me having that repetitive thought over and over and over again, by me taking medication, it stopped. And trust me, from at times I try and have suicidal thoughts, just because I'm still in disbelief that me taking this medication has impacted it. Right. And so I'm not one to say take medication, don't take medication, but I know what works for me. And so that awareness piece is critical, because you never know who you're going to influence, especially when it comes to such a stigmatized topic.
Hmm. And I like how you brought up what works for you, because when we're talking about mental health, just because something works for one person doesn't necessarily mean that everyone else can kind of group together under that umbrella, because everyone is completely different. I mean, what we have in our lives, as human beings, we're social beings. And I hate to sound like I'm getting ahead of myself, but I feel like I am. Um, Here in this pandemic, clearly that's tested everyone. But again, I'm trying to keep some order and some form to this, because there's so much to talk about. What are some what are some specific challenges regarding mental health awareness today, do you believe?
So what do you mean exactly?
So when I say challenges, there was a bullet point that I had read talking about the delay between onset of symptoms and actually getting treatment. 11 years. That is, that's mind blowing. That's mind blowing.
Yeah, yeah,
Why is that?
and that's going up, right? Because when I first started being a quote unquote advocate for mental health, which was the creation of Quantify 5 years ago, it was 10 years, right?
Mm,
The time between the onset of mental health and the time somebody gets treatment, and again, that goes to a lack of awareness about what's taking place, right?
okay.
That may take time, and truly accepting what's happening with you. For so many of us, we experience trauma, we experience these various influencers of mental health, but we've normalized it, right? Until we get to a point where it's like, hey, this isn't how things are supposed to be going. And then we go into, it's so many different, factors that influence that. We talk about socioeconomic factors,
Mm,
people not having health insurance despite, quote unquote, I'm not going to call it Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, right?
okay.
Um, we're talking about access. How are we accessing these types of services? I think what the beauty of COVID and this pandemic is to show us that everything y'all said couldn't take place, now it can take place.
How
And
about
I
that?
say that specifically to to teletherapy, right? That was a big no-no, right? Insurance companies would not approve that. And now here we are, everybody's doing telemedicine, and it's something that's here to stay. And so when we talk about access, everybody doesn't have the means of transportation to go down to their local community center or to go to a therapist. Then we also, again, it's so many factors, and I can go
Oh,
on and on
it
about it.
is. That's why I said this particular segment is probably not going to be enough time, but just the fact that I get a chance to talk with you and at least kind of touch on some of the pressing questions that I'm sure that a lot of us have. Um, there was something that you mentioned that I totally honestly forgot when you talk about just accepting the fact. When we talk about challenges, that is, you think of the socioeconomic, you think of the challenges of physically, excuse me, getting to an office. But first and foremost, just as a person, accepting that there's something different within yourself. Because I know, prime example for myself, there were differences that I noticed, and it took a very long time for me to recognize and accept the fact that maybe I need to see a therapist as well. Maybe there's someone out there that I need to discuss with what's going on inside of me to kind of help alleviate these horrible anxious thoughts that I was myself experiencing.
Yeah, I think we do an amazing job of shaming people in America, right? And then we internalize that shame, and we begin to shame ourselves with our experiences that are natural and uh, that occur within other people, right? But
Hmm.
we shame ourselves to the point where we operate in silos when it comes to those issues that again are highly stigmatized.
Why is that? Why do you? I mean, I'm sure that's a seriously loaded question I'm asking, but why the stigma? What is the deal with stigma? Why couldn't it be something as simple as, oh yeah, you have a little bit of a cold, take this, or yeah, your sugar's a little bit high. These are some precautions, or this is what the prognosis is. This is what is prescribed. It seems like there's no stigma attached to any of that stuff. So why the stigma with mental health concerns?
Yeah, I've asked myself that over the years, and I don't think I've come up with an amazing answer. I attribute it to when we talk about physical issues, physical ailments. People can see those, right?
Right.
People can see, and even those are stigmatized, right? If we look at somebody different who has a limp or who may have a deformity or what have you, because we don't understand it. And so if we don't understand something, of it's going to be stigmatized just by the very nature of it, because you're afraid of it, you're scared. And so I think when we talk about the idea of stigma, it's truly rooted in fear of the unknown.
Okay. Um, Thank you. I appreciate the short answer because that's something I'm sure that's an ever learning process for most of us. We're going to take a short break, but when we return, we'll keep this very important conversation going. So please stay tuned.
As birthplace to the first volunteer fire companies, Philadelphia is home to one of the nation's premier fire museums. Fireman's Hall Museum displays the city's fire history in addition to promoting fire safety. You can visit Fireman's Hall Museum in Old City at 147 North 2nd Street. Visit firemanshallmuseum.org to learn more, or watch the museum's show, Curator's Corner, on LaSalle TV.
Welcome back to Freedom from Fire. I'm your host, Lieutenant Lisa Desamour. We've been discussing mental health concerns and the importance of bringing recognition to it. Philip and I, for those that are just kind of tuning in and didn't get a chance to see the first portion, have been discussing all things mental health related. And then we're just going to get back into the second half of my questions here. The next question, and Philip, you actually did start talking about this in the very beginning of the segment. How would you define the concept of well being and how do we promote it?
When I think about the idea of well-being, I use the two words of living versus thriving, right?
Okay.
And living is we go throughout our day to day, not really enjoying life, right? Because life is meant to be enjoyed. Despite the stressors and the pressures that we all experience, we should all be taking some enjoyment out of this, right? And not only enjoyment in the area of things that I enjoy doing. Yes, that's a component of it, but also just being able to be at peace, right? Being able to be at peace psychologically without having the perseverating thoughts, without having the bouts of depression, without the anger and the rage that comes with some of these diagnoses, right? So this idea of well-being is just being able to flourish in all areas of your life and being able to handle and cope with everything that you're going to be faced with. And so when we talk about how do we promote it, is shows like this, it's the work that I do, the work that you do, continue to speak truth to power, continue to be vulnerable, talk about your experiences, talk about my experiences, to normalize it.
You know, it's interesting when you bring up the word vulnerable because I can speak from a different perspective, you know, being in public safety. Vulnerability is not very, what's the accepted word to use when it comes to vulnerability and you know, the fire department. It's, I guess I'll just put it out there. It's almost considered a sign of weakness. Um, and I've always thought that to be very interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I call him my old head, right? He was a former firefighter. His name Kenny Green Sr., right? And he
Mm,
passed away maybe about 3 or 4 years. Knew him. I'm about to get emotional now talking about him. I knew him the majority of my life, right? And he was always that person who he was the macho man, right? He wasn't as vulnerable, but that was just who he was. And I found myself at his when I was at his funeral, right? I I wish I had more intimate conversations with him, right? Because he was one of the only father figures that I've known throughout my existence. And I think about how that influences us, the stressors and the pressure that builds, especially when we talk about in certain professions, we realize that the lack of vulnerability only increases our ability to cope and handle situations, which directly impacts uh, whether we develop one of these diagnoses that we're talking about. So again, vulnerability is key in the world where we have again masculinity and it's so many factors that contributed to it. But I look at it as survival, right? It's in order to be a firefighter, in certain situations, you can't necessarily be as vulnerable as you desire. Why? Because it's a life or death situation,
mhm.
right? And so, but unfortunately, it's going too far in so many different professions and just with people day to day, where we're just worried about surviving and not about living and thriving.
Mhm. Do you think that because of the pandemic, because of COVID-19, that mental health is being more recognized and the importance and the awareness portion of it?
Oh, for sure, for sure. COVID set everybody down,
Hmm.
right? It put everybody in timeout. It closed a lot of facilities up in different places to where when we talk about I'll use since I identify as a black man, we talk about the gym. The gym is somewhere where I go to decompress. It helps with my mental health. And one day it was just like we closed for the next 4 months.
Hmm.
And what it highlighted was the lack of coping skills and coping tools that we had in our tool belt. I always use the analogy of you have a construction worker with a hammer who goes to the construction site, right? He's going to be able to bang some nails, but
Hmm.
when he needs to saw some things, when he needs to measure some things, he doesn't have those tools, those skills. Then what is he going to do? And I think COVID exposed that for many people, that they don't necessarily have all the tools in their tool belt that they need.
It absolutely did. I mean, because just the perfect example you gave about going to the gym. While I'm sure some folks recognize that as some form of coping mechanism, but what if, that is taken away, which during the pandemic it was. Um, what can you do at home? Because most of us are running away from home. A lot of people like, oh, I need to get out to the gym, or I need to my guilty pleasure, retail therapy, or something like that. I mean, it's amazing because now you're sitting at home. For some of us, it's still quiet. For others, you have the kids at home, and now it's like everything is it's a different world. It's completely different.
Yeah, yeah, and it's how you look at it, right? I think in the beginning, I think we've done a heck of a job. I'm not going to curse because I know we on television, but you know the word I wanted to use. We've done a heck of a job to get to this day right here, and this is where we talk about the idea of resilience. We can
Mm,
look at it. Yes, we've been in a year. It's almost a year of being in a pandemic, and all the things that went wrong, but yet here we are,
mhm,
right? And that's where we need to pull from that inner strength and look at what we've endured because it hasn't been easy. We've lost folk. We've
mm.
businesses have closed. We haven't had the ability to interact with people that we were typically used to. And we're going to all have to readjust to that. I only can imagine what small talk is going to be like once the world opens back up because we haven't had it, right? We don't. And so, again, we need to celebrate those things and still, in the meantime, trying to identify other ways to cope. So when we are feeling those stresses and pressures of life, we can adapt to it.
So this is perfect. This leads into my next question. What role does trauma or biological factors play when it comes to mental health?
Oh man, trauma is like the proverbial butter to the bread of
Okay.
mental health, right? Trauma is the biggest influencer of mental health for all people. There's so many different types of trauma. We're talking about bullying, we're talking about community violence, disasters, which we're experiencing now, physical abuse, medical trauma, sexual abuse. There's so many, right? And some of it is acute, some of it is more ongoing, right? That's the complex trauma that we talk about. So we're talking about abuse and neglect and what have you. We're talking about the acute trauma of a sexual assault, even though that also has long-term effects. But yeah, there's a direct relationship between trauma and mental health. There's a high likelihood that if you experience trauma, that you'll develop a mental health diagnosis. But what's key about trauma is just like mental health in this conversation, it's unique to the individual,
Yeah.
right? It's unique to the individual. What somebody calling me a name, right, may be different than if they call you a name. I may fall into a bout of depression if somebody says something to me and it negatively impacts me, where somebody else might just laugh it off and it doesn't impact them. And so, there are certain aspects of trauma um, that, again, is endemic to us all,
Hmm.
but ultimately it's still unique and dependent on the individual.
What about biological factors?
I mean, biological factors are tricky when we talk about mental health. Some people say it's just ingrained in our DNA.
Right.
It's when we same thing, we talk about alcoholism and so many other things. There's research is still out on the biological factors, right? But now I said all that, let's take it back because now I'm thinking you are genetically. So, for example, my grandmother had schizophrenia, right? She wanted to throw my mom out of the window when she was a baby, and her 12-year-old sister said, "No, I'll take her," and they all ended up in foster care, right? And we know that if there is a history of mental health in your family, right, you may be genetically predisposed to it, right? So might not necessarily be schizophrenia, but again, the depression and anxiety that I experience. And so it's just like that nature and nurture, that perfect storm that come together,
Okay.
right? That can influence one's mental health. So I started off one way, but came back over here.
Okay. Okay. And completely understood. Completely understood. Um, I really want to also get to warning signs, if that's the correct terminology to use. Are there warning signs? Is there something to look for?
Yeah, it's dependent upon the diagnoses, right? Because when we speak about, so there's two types of conversations. There's the formalized mental health when we talk about these diagnoses, depression, anxiety, and then there's the informal mental health when we're talking about just how we're feeling, sad, happy, mad, and what have you. And so what I'll speak to is those warning signs that are taking place in the informal that can end up having us in the formal with the formal diagnosis. So, we're talking about persistence of anxiety, being in situations, and you have rapid breathing, you have increased sweating, you have those perseverating thoughts, thinking something over and over and over again, not understanding why. We're talking about isolation, right? We're talking about feeling the need to always be around people because there's such a discomfort in being with self, which we're seeing now in the social media age. And the reason why we're seeing such an increase in depression and anxiety, we're talking, oh man, we're talking about anger and rage, right? When I think about the Black boys and Black men that I work with, when we talk about depression, they're not necessarily going to be in their room sleeping for 3 or 4 days, right? No, they're going to be angry. They're going to be, because that's how it manifests itself. And so instead of it being somebody that's incorrigible, somebody who's a menace, no, it's actually masking the depression and anxiety because that's how they cope. Again, it's so many irritability, and then we have the entire suicide prevention component, and those
Come
warning
back.
signs.
That's
Yeah, I ain't gonna go there.
you no, I'm not to cut you off, but just to kind of put it out there, so put you on blast in front of everybody as well. You're coming back.
Word.
Coming back. We're gonna get back into this, and then for the second portion, I'll consult with you beforehand for stuff that that I didn't think of to ask, because I'm sure there's a lot of information that I didn't think of that our viewers would definitely be interested in. Remember, if you would like to find out more about us on LaSalle TV, you can check out our social media sites. And if you're interested in learning about the Philadelphia Fire Department, visit our Facebook, Twitter, and web pages. Also, check out our Firemen's Hall Museum located 147 North 2nd Street. It's in the Old City section of our city. I would like to once again thank Phillip for joining us today. I would also like to thank everyone for tuning in and watching. So until next time, remember, fire is everyone's fight. Stay safe and remain free from fire.